Hi there, I'm Professor Jonathan Singer. I'm the Vice Chair of the CAAT-Academic Bargaining Team negotiating on behalf of full-time and partial load faculty at Ontario's 24 public colleges, and this is the fifth of a series of videos on SWFs, what they record, how to read them, and how to identify and correct any errors in your workload assignment. This video will be looking at how to resolve disputes to ensure that your SWF accurately reflects the assigned workload and to ensure that you actually have enough time in order to complete the work that is assigned on the SWF. Generally speaking, there are three steps to dispute resolution, and disputes could be resolved at any of these three steps. There's a discussion with your supervisor, and if a dispute persists beyond that, then there's the option to refer to the College Workload Monitoring Group, otherwise known as WMG. And if the Workload Monitoring Group is unable to resolve any disputes or concerns, then professors and instructors who are full-time can then refer their workload concerns to the Workload Resolution Arbitrator, otherwise known as WRA. Now, prior to the assignment of workload in the form of the SWF, where it is recorded, SWF being standard workload form, there's two provisions in the collective agreement. The first of which says that before the methods of evaluation and feedback are established for a course, the supervisor will consult with the affected teachers as a group to ensure that the methods of evaluation and feedback are appropriate, as listed on the SWF, to the evaluation needs of the students and the curriculum and the course learning outcomes. So prior to the assignment of these factors on the SWF, there's supposed to be a discussion between the supervisor and the affected teachers as a group. This would be particularly relevant if the methods of evaluation are being changed at any time. As well, on an individual level, prior to the establishment of a total workload for any teacher meaning professor or instructor, the supervisor shall discuss the proposed workload with the teacher and complete the SWF to be provided by the college. The supervisor shall give a copy to the teacher not later than 6 weeks prior to the beginning of the period covered by the timetable, excluding holidays and vacations. So prior to receiving a SWF, you are supposed to have had a discussion with your supervisor, which would be the first place where any disputes or conflicts could be resolved. Sometimes faculty are given draft SWFs and invited to provide feedback on the draft SWF to their supervisor, which is again one place where conflicts can be identified and resolved before the SWF is finalized. When you receive a SWF, the collective agreement says, in the event that the teacher is not in agreement with the total workload and wishes it to be reviewed by the Workload Monitoring Group, the teacher must so indicate in writing to the supervisor within 5 working days following the date of receipt of the SWF. The completed SWF will be forwarded by the supervisor to the WMG within 3 working days from date of receipt from the teacher, with a copy to be given to the teacher. Now, all that means is when you receive a SWF, you have 5 days in order to identify a wish for it to be reviewed by the Workload Monitoring Group. And it also says, following receipt of the SWF, the teacher shall indicate in writing on the SWF whether in agreement with the total workload. If not in agreement, the teacher and the supervisor may add such other comments as is considered appropriate and may indicate in writing that the workload should be reviewed by the College Workload Monitoring Group, for which reason we have the options for ticking off that I've included as an image here. 1, indicating mutual agreement of assigned workload, or proposed workload referred to College Workload Monitoring Group for review, or perhaps if there happens to be a specific concern that you might list in faculty comments. I'll discuss that a little bit further. There's also a box referring the proposed workload to the Workload Resolution Arbitrator. While it's not mandatory, I have learned with time that it's beneficial to check off both of the boxes referring to the WMG and the WRA. Checking off both of them indicates my intention to refer my workload to the Workload Monitoring Group, and then my intention to refer it to the Workload Resolution Arbitrator if the WMG is unable to resolve my concerns. Now, it's understood that if you do not respond to a SWF, that there is mutual agreement, which would have the same effect as checking off that box indicating mutual agreement of assigned workload. But even if you do agree to the assigned workload, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no room for you to communicate concerns or identify problems or conflicts as you discover them. In fact, the collective agreement has a specific dispute resolution process following agreement of assigned workload. And what it says is, in the event of any difference arising from the interpretation, application, administration, or alleged contravention of 1101, 1102, or 1109, a teacher shall discuss such difference as a complaint with the teacher's immediate supervisor. So what that means is that if you are in the process of doing the work that's on a SWF that you have approved, that you have agreed to, and you realize that the SWF does not provide enough time to do that work, that's a difference arising from the application of your workload assignment, 1101. And therefore, you can still take it to a dispute resolution process. But rather than taking it directly to the workload monitoring group, the first step is to give your manager, your supervisor, an opportunity to resolve the complaint on their own. So first step, after you've agreed to the SWF, after it's been assigned, the first step would be for you to go to your supervisor and say, hey, I've got a problem with my workload. This aspect is taking me much more time than I'm attributed for. I'm being forced to do things that are not listed on my SWF. There's any number of reasons why you might bring a workload concern to your supervisor. But the collective agreement says that you shall do it within 14 days after the circumstances giving rise to the complaint have occurred or have come or ought reasonably to have come to the attention of the teacher in order to give the immediate supervisor an opportunity to adjust the complaint. So you identify a concern in the process of preparing or teaching your courses or completing the complementary functions identified. And you bring that concern to your manager, after which your immediate supervisor is supposed to provide a response to your complaint within 7 days after discussion. And failing settlement of the complaint, the teacher may refer the complaint in writing to the workload monitoring group within 7 days of receipt of the immediate supervisor's reply, or within 7 days after the meeting takes place if no reply is received. Now, some possible grounds for referring workload, these are by no means the only grounds. This is not an exhaustive or an exclusive list, but different things that could be put on faculty comments if you wished to identify specific grounds for referring your workload to the WMG would be that the time attributed on the SWF is not sufficient to prepare any particular section or all of the sections put together that you've been assigned. It could be that the evaluation factors on the SWF fail to reflect the actual types of evaluation that are required by the curriculum or the course's learning outcomes. It could be that the SWF simply provides insufficient time to evaluate the students in any or all of your sections, even if the types of evaluation are accurately recorded on the SWF. It simply requires more time than the SWF is providing. And again, if you need a reminder about how to identify how much time is provided for evaluation on your SWF, you can find that in video number 3. You could be communicating a complaint around the complementary functions, which are discussed in video number 4. Specifically, perhaps the minimum 4 hours is insufficient for all of your students' out-of-class assistance needs, whether you decide it's best to spend those 4 hours on office hours or on emails or on some mixture of the two. Perhaps you'll find that 4 hours is simply not sufficient, even after you have mutually agreed to a workload that only provided for 4 hours. This is an opportunity for you to go to your supervisor and try to get that workload complaint addressed and resolved. Similarly, the minimum 2 hours might be insufficient for all of the normal administrative tasks that you need to do throughout the course of your semester each week. For example, academic integrity reports, administrative tasks associated with accommodations, or the administrative tasks associated with using the college's learning management system. Or perhaps required complementary tasks and the time that they require are not adequately captured on the SWF. Something turned out to take more time than you had thought it would, than you and your supervisor had agreed that it would before the semester started, but circumstances are changing, and therefore your understanding, your application of the SWF is creating conflict. Once you refer a SWF to the Workload Monitoring Group, either whether it happens to be within 5 days of first receiving the SWF by checking the box and signing it over to the WMG, or after that time, once you've given your immediate supervisor a chance to resolve the workload dispute and they have failed to resolve it following a written response to a meeting, the collective agreement has some fairly clear and specific provisions for how to resolve complaints, and they concern the Workload Monitoring Group, WMG, and the Workload Resolution Arbitrator, WRA. And it says that the Workload Monitoring Group shall meet where feasible within 1 week of receipt of a workload complaint, and that any decision made by a majority of the Workload Monitoring Group shall be communicated by the college and shall be binding on the college, the union, and the teacher involved. The Workload Monitoring Group consists of equal numbers of members appointed by the union and by college management. Alternately, if following a review of the Workload Monitoring Group, the individuals on those two sides of the Workload Monitoring Group are not able to resolve the issue presented to them by an individual, then the teacher shall be so advised in writing, and the matter may then be referred by the teacher to a workload resolution arbitrator within 1 week of the receipt of this notification. And the workload resolution arbitrator has the right to determine the process of this arbitration, but the collective agreement does specify that the process must be informal. And Article 1102 F5 and F6 says the workload resolution arbitrator shall determine appropriate procedure and commence proceedings within 2 weeks of the referral of the matter to the workload resolution arbitrator, and shall discuss the matter with the teacher's supervisor, and whomever else the arbitrator considers appropriate, and shall then issue a written award resolving the matter within 10 working days of the informal discussion. Workload resolution arbitration awards are identified explicitly as informal and having no application beyond the individual teacher involved, and no application beyond 1 year's time after the issuing of the award. That's the overview of workload dispute resolution procedures. If you have any further questions, I would encourage you to reach out to your college's workload monitoring group, your union representatives, and they'll be able to offer you much more detailed discussions and explanations. Thank you for watching. Please share this or any of the previous videos. This video is intended only for informational purposes for OPSU CAAT-Academic faculty members and should not be treated as authoritative advice. Also, it should not be introduced in whole or in part in any dispute resolution proceeding. For authoritative advice on the SWF, please consult your union local or the union-appointed members of your workload monitoring group.